Hi there, I'm Wendy and welcome to my channel where I share knitting and crochet tutorial videos for my projects and techniques. And today's video is a sock knitting video, and I'm going to show you how to work a German short row toe, which is very similar to working the German short row heel. There's just a couple of differences when we get to the turnaround point, when we get to the top of the toes. So with the German short row toe, we actually start making our toe at this point here, which is underneath the ball of the foot, compared with some of the other methods where you start at the very tips of the toes. So if you're someone that struggles with Judy's Magic Cast On or a Turkish cast on, this could be a nice alternative for you to try. So just before we start, if you're new to my channel, then don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell, and you'll get to hear when my next videos and updates go live. And if you've enjoyed this video, it would be lovely if you gave me a thumbs up as well. But for now, we'll get straight on and take a look at how we're going to work this German short row toe. Now, the sock that I'm going to be making is going to have 60 stitches in total, and that's going to be 30 stitches on the upper side of the foot and 30 stitches on the lower side of the foot. Now, I'm working the magic loop method, so I've got an 80cm length circular needle, and I'm using a 2.5mm needle, and I'm using 4-ply weight sock yarn. Now, I've already prepared this in advance, so I've cast on 30 stitches and I knitted a couple of rows just in straight garter stitch. Then I knitted a couple more rows in stocking stitch just to give me this provisional type cast on. And then for the demonstration here, I've added an extra row of the knit stitch in a different colour so that it contrasts more strongly between the blue and the green. So I've got this pink line here, which is going to be my dividing line. So I've knitted one row to start with, so I'm going to turn my work around so that I'm ready to purl. And I'm going to be working the decreasing side of the toe first. So I'm working in thirds, and as I've got 30 stitches along here, I'm going to be dividing it into 3 sets of 10. So that's 10, 20, 30 stitches in total. And so I'm going to start working stocking stitch rows now, and I'm going to be working 1 double stitch at the beginning of each row, and that will gradually reduce the length of our rows down, and I'm going to keep working that until I get 10 central stitches left on my needle. So I'm going to show you how to work a double stitch now. As I said a moment ago, I've already knitted 1 row in the yarn that I'm using for the toe of my sock, and that was a knit row, and I'm turning ready to work a purl row. So I'm going to slip the first stitch from the left hand needle to the right hand needle, and I'm slipping that across purlwise. Then I'm going to take the yarn up over the needle, and you can see that distorts the stitch and creates this double stitch. And I take the yarn down the back, under the needle and back to the front, ready to purl. And now I've got these 2 stitches looking at me, and that's the first double stitch made. And so now I can just purl to the end of the row. So I've now reached the end of my first purl row, and I'm going to turn my work ready for a knit row. And so again, I'm just going to slip the first stitch from the left hand needle across to the right hand needle. And then I'm going to bring my yarn up the back of my work, over the top of the needle to the front, and back down to the back of the work again, and I've made another double stitch. I've distorted the stitches, and I've now got those 2 threads representing my first stitch. And so now I'm going to knit all the way across until I reach the double stitch that's at the end of the row, which is the double stitch I made at the beginning of that previous purl row. So I'll meet you when I get to the end of the row. So I've now knitted across the row until I've reached this double stitch which I made at the beginning of the previous row. So when I get to that point, I'm going to just turn my work, leaving that double stitch on the needle. And now when I take a look at it, I've already got this double stitch on the right hand needle, and I'm going to slip the first stitch here from the left needle across onto the right as well. So now I've done that, I'm going to create another double stitch. So I'm going to take my yarn up over the needle. So I'm going directly over the top of the needle and coming down behind the needle, and then taking my yarn underneath the needle and back to the front. And again, that's distorted the stitch and created this double stitch here. And so now I'm going to purl all the way across until I reach that double stitch at the end of this row. So I'll meet you again when I get to the end of the row. And so I've now worked across all my purl stitches until I've reached the double stitch at the end of this row as well. So I'm going to leave that double stitch unworked and leave it on that needle and just turn my needles around so that I've got a knit row facing me and I'm ready to work my next row. So again, I'm going to slip that stitch from the left hand needle across to the right hand needle. And then I'm going to make another double stitch at the beginning of this row as well. So I'm going to take my yarn from the back up directly over the top of the needle to the front, and then back around under the needle to the back, and that has created this double stitch and distorted the stitch slightly as well. So now I'm going to knit across these stitches until I reach the double stitches at the end of the knit row. So I'll meet you when I reach the end of this row. So you can now see that I now have 2 double stitches at the end of this row on the left hand needle, and I'm going to leave those unworked and turn my work. And I'm going to make a double stitch again on the purl row. So I'm just going to simply slip my stitch purlwise from the left hand needle to the right hand needle, and then I can take my yarn up and over the needle and down to the back, under the needle and back round to the front, ready to purl. And I've now got 3 double stitches on the right hand needle, and so I'm going to continue now just working my purl stitches until I reach the wrap stitches at the end of this row. And so I've reached the end of the row until I've reached the last 2 wrap stitches. So I'm going to leave those on the needle and turn my work ready for a knit row. So again, I'm going to slip the stitch from the left hand needle to the right hand needle, bring the yarn up over the back of the needle, over the top and down the front, and then under the needle to the back, and I've created another wrap stitch. Now I'm going to continue working my rows of stocking stitch in this manner, and at the beginning of every row I'm going to make another double stitch, and I'll meet you back here when I've got 10 double stitches on the left hand side of my heel and 10 double stitches on the right hand side of my heel, and then I've got 10 stitches left of stocking stitch in the middle. So I'll see you when I've worked the first half of this heel. And so I'm back again, and I've finished working the decreasing section of my heel, and I continued working stocking stitch rows, making a double stitch at the beginning of each row until I had 10 double stitches on the left hand side and 10 double stitches on the right hand side and 10 double stitches left in the middle. And I just popped an extra loop in my cord so that you could see them laid out. But when you actually finish your work, it will look more like this. So it will look a little bit lopsided, but that's where you'll have your 10 stitches in the center here with your wrap stitches either side. And so we're ready now to work the second section of the heel, where we're increasing back out again, and we're going to start from our 10 stitches in the middle, and we're going to be making an extra double stitch as we work each row. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So the first thing to do is to knit across those 10 central stitches. So that's my third, my fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth and 10th. And then the first thing I'm going to do is to knit into that wrap stitch. Now what's important is that you make sure that you knit through both sections of this wrap here. And what I like to do on the left hand side is to knit into the back of the stitch, which feels quite a natural thing to do anyway. So I'm going to take my right hand needle and I'm going to pop it in as if to purl, and I'm taking it in from right to left under the first wrap and then under the second wrap, and then I move that needle from the front underneath to the back. Okay, so I'm going to do that again. I'm going to take it out and show you again. So I've got my tip of my right hand needle here, and I'm going to take it in purlwise from the right to the left. So I'm going in under the first wrap and then in under the second wrap. Now it feels like I'm going to purl, but I'm going to take the tip of this needle and just slide it underneath the left needle to the back. And now I'm going to knit into the back of that stitch. And what that's done is that's created a left-handed slant to my stitch. And then I'm going to do the same with the second stitch. So I'm going to go in from underneath the first wrap and the second wrap. And then I'm going to take the tip of that needle underneath the left hand needle and to the back, and then I'm going to knit into the back of the second stitch. Now once I've knitted into 2 wrap stitches, I'm then going to turn my work. Then, like before, I'm going to slip the first stitch from the left hand needle to the right hand needle. And then I'm going to take my yarn up over the top and down the back, under the needle and back round to the front, and create a double stitch, just like we were making when we were working that first section of our heel. So now I'm going to purl across until I reach the double stitches on the other side of my work. So I've worked across the central section, and the double stitches, they're so distinctive that you can't miss them. So I've now reached the other side of my heel. So I'm now going to purl into this double stitch, but make sure that I purl through both strands of that stitch. So I'm going through 1 and 2, and then I'm going to purl them off together. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the second stitch. So I'm going to make sure that I go through both strands of that double stitch. So that's 1 and 2. And then I just purl them together. Okay, so now we've purled 2 double stitches, we can turn our work and we're ready to work a knit row. So now I'm going to make a wrap stitch just like I was in the lower half of the heel again on the knit rows. So I'm going to slip the stitch from the left hand needle to the right hand needle, and then bring that yarn up the back, over the top and down the front, then back around under the needle to the back, and then I'm going to knit across until I reach the wrap stitches on the other side of my heel again. Okay, so I've reached the double stitches on the other side of my heel, and I'm going to knit the first 2 stitches and make sure that I knit through both of those strands of each double stitch and knit through the back of the stitch so that I get that left hand leaning slant. So I'm going to take my needle in from right to left as if I'm to purl. So I've gone through 1 strand, and then I'm going to go in from right to left through the second strand of the stitch, and my needle is at the front, and then I'm going to slide that right hand needle underneath the left hand needle to the back of my work, and then I can just knit that stitch off. And I'm going to do the same thing with the next stitch as well. So I'm going to take my right hand needle and I'm going to take it in from right to left under one strand of yarn and then under the second strand of yarn, and the stitch looks as if I'm going to purl it. So then I'm going to take the tip of this right hand needle and slide it underneath the left hand needle to the back of my work, and now I can knit that off. So now I'm ready to turn my work again, and if you look carefully you can see that I am now starting to increase out along my heel stitches. So I'm turning my work and I'm going to make a double stitch purlwise. So I'm going to slip that stitch from the left hand needle to the right hand needle, take my yarn up and over the needle down to the back and round to the front, and then I'm going to purl across till I reach the double stitches on the other side of my work. So I'll meet you back here when I get to those stitches. So I've now reached the double stitches on the other side of my heel, and I'm going to purl through both strands of the first two stitches. So this is my first double stitch and I'm purling through, making sure that I pick up both strands. So if you can see here, I've got both strands of them. So that's my first one. And then I'm going to purl through the second double stitch, again making sure that I've picked up both strands. And I'm now ready to turn my work and work a knit row. So I continue this way, and whether I'm knitting or purling a row, I'm always going to slip the first stitch, take the yarn up and over the needle and back down to its original starting point and create a double stitch, and then I'm going to either knit or purl across depending on what row I'm working until I reach the double stitches on the other side of the row. Then I'll be working through both sides of the first two double stitches and I can just turn my work again. So I'm just going to complete this last row for you and show you one more time before I meet you back here at the end of the heel. So I've now reached the first two double stitches on the other side of the heel, and as it's a knit row we're going to make sure that we work through the back of the stitch. So I'm initially going to pop my needle in purlwise, so that's gone through one strand and then through the second strand, and then I can move that needle from the front of my work, sliding it under the left hand needle to the back, and then knit those stitches off through the back of the loop, and then again with the second stitch. So I'm going to take my needle purlwise through both strands of that double stitch, and then again move the tip of the needle from the front of the work under to the back, and then I can just knit that stitch off. And again I'm ready to turn and slip my first stitch across. So I'll continue in this manner until I've worked all the way back to just having one double stitch left on each end of my needles, and I'll meet you back there just to finish off working this toe. So I've now worked all my double stitches back outwards, and I've got one double stitch that I've just worked here on the beginning of this knit row, and I've got one double stitch left at the very end to knit as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue knitting across till I get to the end of the row, knit that double stitch just like before, and then I'm going to meet you back here again and show you how I pick up the stitches on the other side of my toe, so that I'm then ready to continue knitting in the round and start working the foot of my sock. So I'm back now at the end of that row, and I'm just going to knit that double stitch through the back of the stitch, so that's completed. Turn my work, and I'm now ready to pick up my stitches and get rid of this provisional cast on. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the video, I told you that I'd made this provisional cast on using a different colour of yarn, and I cast on 30 stitches. I worked 2 rows of the knit stitch and then I worked a couple of rows of stocking stitch just to give me this little edge that didn't roll quite as much, that I could then continue to start working the heel of my sock. Now, normally I wouldn't have added this red row here at all. I would have made my provisional little piece of knitting here and gone straight into starting the toe of my sock. But I've added this row because I want to be able to show you afterwards exactly where the start point was for your sock. So you would normally be looking at picking up this top line of stitches here that's just underneath the provisional cast on, but I'm going to be picking up this red row here so that I can show you. Now, you can pick up your stitches by just picking up the bumps of the stitches here, but I'm going to work into the front of my sock so that I can make sure that I've picked up every stitch. So I've got my knitting needle in my left hand, and I'm going to go through the centre of the first V and out to the right of it, and then go in the centre of the next red V and out to the side of it, and into the centre of the following one, and so on and so on. And I'm going to do this all the way along and then make a quick count so that I can make sure that I've picked up 30 stitches, and then I'll show you how I remove the yarn from my provisional cast on. So I'm just going to do a quick count up to make sure that I've got the correct amount of stitches. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30. So I know I've got all my stitches on the needle and they're ready to be knitted. So I can now remove this provisional cast on. So I'm just going to snip into the edge of it just to unravel it. And we've just got to find the edge that connects into my row of stitches that are sitting on the needle. So there we go. There we go. Once I've got a thread, I'm away. Pull those little threads out. I know this is a little bit laborious, but doing it this way, I know that I'm not going to lose any stitches. So I'm just snipping beneath those stitches that are on my needle and then removing that waste yarn. Remove some more. I'm just carefully snipping away below those pink stitches and then pulling away the green yarn. And my last few stitches, just remove those last little fibres, and then we should be able to turn our work round and see that our sock is ready to be knitted. So when I take a look at it now, this is the line of stitches that I wanted to leave on there so that I can show you what the start point is. So I'm now just going to pull out my working needle and I'm ready to start knitting in the round. And if we just turn it around, we can see that we've got both sides of the stitches now on our circular needle. So I'll knit a couple more rounds and you can then just take a final look and see where the starting point was, and our German short bow toe for our socks is then complete. So I'll be back in a mo. So if we take one final look at it, you can see that we finished our German short bow heel for our toe up socks, and if we turn it over, you can see the red line of stitches, which was the starting point. And if I turn the toe upside down, you can see now that below this red line was where I originally had the green yarn, which was my provisional cast on. And then we worked our double stitches, working decreases, bringing our stitch count down to 10 stitches in the middle. And then if we look on the other side of our sock, you can see that we worked our double stitches back out, taking us to the 30 stitches, which is the stitch count that we needed to continue. So now I've got 30 stitches on the front of my sock and on the back of my sock, so I've got 60 stitches in total. I can continue knitting the foot section of my sock. So I hope that's been useful and it's given you another alternative for working toe up socks compared to Judy's Magic Cast On or a Turkish cast on. So for now, I'll just say I hope you found this useful. Thanks for joining me, happy sock knitting, and I look forward to seeing you soon.